Today's episode begins in 2 minutes. So first, here's a preview of what's coming up, followed by a host and guest introduction.
Lieutenant Colonel, Army Ranger, Delta Force. I don't know about all your Purple Hearts and all that stuff, but there's a lot. You're a warrior and a war hero, but you're also a chaplain, a great preacher, a great friend. So you got a lot of interesting stuff. And as much as you're allowed to say without the Pentagon flying over my house, I want to hear it all.
I had a cross tattooed on my shoulder, and so he goes, Dan, I see you got a cross tattooed on your arm there. He goes, you're a Christian? And I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. And he looked right back at me just like I'm looking at you, and he said, I really wouldn't know it by the way you live your life. And man, it was kind of like, wow.
This is the Good Grief, Good God show, featuring raw, honest conversation about surviving things that suck, available in audio and on YouTube. I'm producer Matt Pivito. Your host, songwriter Brad Warren of the Warren Brothers, has written songs recorded by artists including Tim McGraw and Faith Hill to Taylor Swift and Leonard Skinner, with 9 reaching #1. But Brad's purpose goes far beyond songwriting. Shaped by Brad's lived experience, including 20 years in sobriety, and created in honor of Brad and Michelle's son Sage, who was tragically lost to fentanyl poisoning in 2020, this show offers a space for guests to share deeply personal stories of resilience, hope, and faith, and even a little laughter along the way. For today's episode, Brad welcomes a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, Army Ranger, Chaplain, and Purple Heart recipient whose life has been forged through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering faith under fire. From serving in the elite 75th Ranger Regiment and completing 11 combat deployments, he has walked both the path of a warrior and the calling of a shepherd. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Danny Knight. Danny joins Brad to reflect on his decades of service in special operations, the physical and spiritual cost of combat, and the pivotal moment a fellow chaplain challenged him to truly live the faith he professed.
The guys we wrote Red Soul Cup with, we were just having a ridiculous, and we wrote a song called Billy Graham. Hey, where's my Michelle, where's my book? Hey, where's my book?
It's fancy. The other times I've done podcast type stuff is remote.
Oh, on Zoom?
Like Zoom things. I've never been.
This is very intimate.
In like a studio.
Yeah, you still haven't been in a studio because this isn't one. Oh, yeah, actually, I got some good questions in here, but.
You should have sent those to me.
No. I don't want total conversation.
Unfiltered.
Just conversation. Unfiltered.
No thought. No deep thoughts. I'm just going to tell the truth as I understand it.
Yes, as we go across that.
Share some dogma, some doctrine, and some opinion.
Tell me when you're ready, Matt. Because to be honest, you're one of the few people that has, I shouldn't say that. I should say, what you have very certain beliefs on specific things that you will not back off of, and it doesn't piss me off at all. Okay, I think you stop before it gets to like, no, that's what the Greek root of this word means, and we've.
Yeah. Well,
you're certain about the important things. I think
that's what I would think dogma is. I don't know what the exact definition of dogma is.
But I'm not saving it for this because I do have questions on that front.
I'm gonna Google it real quick.
What dogma means?
Dogma. I'm gonna see what the exact definition.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
A principle or set of principles laid down by an authority is incontrovertibly true. Based on God, the word of God, then you got it.
You're
That's
safe.
Incontrovertibly true. So it doesn't mean you can't argue about it with someone.
Yeah.
But it just means for me, it's incontrovertibly true. I don't know. I haven't researched this quote. I've heard it attributed to Mark Twain about Christianity and or about the Bible. Trustworthiness of the Bible. Yeah. And I guess someone was trying to trip up Mark Twain and say, what about this? What about that? According to the Bible. And he said, it's not the things in the Bible that are hard for me to understand that cause me problems. It's the things in the Bible that are easy to understand and I still don't live by. So when it says love your neighbor as yourself, be kind to others. So it's not the hard questions of the Bible that you ought to be struggling with. It's the very easy things that the Bible spells out that we still don't live up to.
And that's, I guess, when I get my dander up, which has got to be God's process in me, is when the person who has a bunch of knowledge are pounding everyone with, and they don't practice that first number one, love your neighbor principle.
Yeah, so
I'm like, you're
when
really
Jesus,
not a nice person.
When Jesus summed up the whole Bible, It's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And he said the second one is equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so, when we're really haven't figured that part out, but we're willing to fight about all these other parts, it's kind of a problem.
That's really interesting.
And so, like I say, I don't know if Mark Twain actually said that, but I've heard it attributed to Mark Twain or Samuel Longhorn Clemens.
Could have been either one. All right, so I usually don't start off with an introduction, but no one's going to be able to Google you and hear about all your accolades. My friend, Danny Knight, Lieutenant Colonel, Army Ranger, Delta Force. I don't know about all your Purple Hearts and all that stuff, but there's a lot. You're a warrior and a war hero, but you're also a chaplain, a great preacher, a great friend. So you got a lot of interesting stuff. And I as much as you're allowed to say without the Pentagon flying over my house, I want to hear it all. And I usually start with a quote, and I forget to say it half the time. So I'm going to start with your quote. I found a quote for everybody that comes on. All right. A godly warrior stands firm, not because the battle is easy, but because his faith is unshakable. You're a warrior, it comes, I don't know if we start with the faith or the fighting, but you're kind of an expert at both. I don't know how to, you don't become a special forces guy by accident. How did that happen?
I grew up watching a lot of these kind of Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. I was always, watching war movies. I watched a lot of John Wayne and stuff when I was growing up. And so there was always this kind of martial spirit. By martial, I mean, kind of a military inclination, I guess, if you will. In high school and as a kid and then into high school, I kind of found my way into sports and on sports teams and things like that. And so I enjoy the ideas of teamwork and camaraderie and, developing a work ethic and a discipline to work toward a series of goals. And so I went to college, to play baseball.
Your dad was not in the military or anything.
Oh, he was actually.
Okay.
He was in the Army Reserve, and so I do remember, as a young kid going to the Army Reserve Center, and I remember meeting, one of his first sergeants or something who had a bunch of ribbons and decorations and things like that on his uniform, and I had several uncles who served as well, and so I was always very patriotic. I feel like I was patriotic. I understood, that there were men and women who had, done great things for our country. And so anyway, playing sports and all in high school, and then went to college, to play baseball. And, when I finally I was always decent. When I finally got to college level, I kind of figured out pretty quickly, it's a great equalizer, right? And so, yeah.
I'm pretty good at this, but it's not going to be my job.
Yeah. I'm not, probably not going to be the next Johnny Bench or whatever. So anyway, just kind of by accident, I signed up for an Army ROTC course and, got into it and just kind of, saw that, hey man, here's a place where, guys are doing things that can make a difference. And I had some really good instructors who were both Army Ranger guys who had served in Ranger units. And I don't know, they saw something in me, and I'd had coaches before, even at high school level, said, hey, you got a pretty good work ethic and you can do this. And so I just it's kind of something I started. And then I remember as my senior year, maybe junior year, I don't remember exactly. It was right after, been 1984. It'd have been my junior year. I don't know if most people won't even remember this, but the Army Rangers jumped into an island in the Caribbean called Grenada. And it was a very short, 5 or 6 day little war conflict against some Cuban-inspired communists who had taken over the government on the island of Grenada. And so one of these guys came and spoke at our high school, and I remember he said, he said, hey, in the Army Rangers, we kind of got a motto, and it's lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And that just kind of struck a chord with me. And so I really, when I got involved in this ROTC class at college, I joined the Army National Guard, and then, got commissioned as an infantry officer. Went on active duty, and my total goal was, hey, go to this thing called Ranger School and then go serve in this unit called the 75th Ranger Regiment. And they really are. I mean, if you Google them or whatever, and there are tons of guys. If you get on and look at podcasts and you look at Sean Ryan and stuff, he's always got guys who served in the 75th Ranger Regiment on there. That was just kind of the goal, and they were, the best light infantry in the U.S. and in the world, really. And I just wanted to get there, and so I found mentors and found guys who could coach and teach me, to kind of train myself to get to that level, and then I got the opportunity to go and serve there.
Do you apply for that?
Yeah, it's a volunteer thing. Yeah, it's all volunteer. So they used to say, that Army Rangers, 3-time volunteers, you volunteer to serve in the Army, you volunteer to, jump out of airplanes or be airborne qualified, and then you volunteer to serve in the Ranger Regiment. And so each one of those is a kind of a different gate, a different series of tasks that you have to complete. Most of them physical in nature, not all. But
you volunteer and then you have to be chosen.
Yeah. So you go to a selection course or whatever, and it used to be called RIP or ROPE, and I think they've changed the acronym now to RASP 1 and RASP 2. But it's a pretty challenging little selection course that you go through to get assigned there. And so, I got to serve there a couple times, and it's just a great place to serve, and some of the absolute best human beings. I still work with them, and I do some veteran service work now. I work with an organization called Three Rangers Foundation. I'm the chaplain for them, really.
I was going to ask about you. I know it's like a shirt.
Wearing a shirt.
I've read some of the stuff that you sent, and it's amazing.
And so, we try to help guys as they transition, get out of the Army. And one of the big things that we find is, most people who are inclined to service, when they get out, they feel like in many ways, in many cases, they've lost their sense of purpose. They've lost their identity because, it's such a strong tribe. And it really is very tribal culturally, it's a very tribal organization. It's a very demanding organization. And so when guys step away from that, there's a period of grief that kind of guys go through. And so what Three Rangers has tried to do is, and the guys who started Three Rangers were all Somalia veterans. So the famous movie Black Hawk Down. So they recognized the need to help guys transition and go back into the world and use those same character strengths that they displayed as Army Rangers to make a difference in the world. And so that's kind of what we do. And it's very rewarding, to stay connected to the tribe, if you will, and to watch guys go to great levels of success in all really facets of our government, of our world. Many of them go into the business sector, many of them go into medicine, law. I mean, the sky's the limit. And you would think, hey, these guys are just a bunch of knuckle dragger, ape men kind of thing. And they are, and they can kid up and go kill anybody in the world anytime they get ready to. But they're also, for the most part, very intelligent, very unique, and very committed individuals who are going to ultimately find success wherever they go. Yeah,
for one thing, I want to say, you keep the locker room, the Three Rangers Foundation, you keep the locker room open. Even if I always talk about if I weren't to not do what I do, which is songwriting, a really long way from being an Army Ranger. But what I would miss is the locker room.
Yeah, exactly.
I miss my coworkers, my friends. It's just you become close over 20 years of service to that. Another thing about knuckle draggy, and I think anyone knows you, but because of knowing you, there's a really cerebral thing about what you do. It's less to do with the badass that you are, which of course you are. Every Army Ranger would have to be, but the temperament you have to have. Like I have discipline and work ethic, and no one ever said you should be an Army Ranger to me. You know what I mean? The even keelness. There's something very special about guys that are able to do what you do, and it's not something that's super quantifiable. Like I'm the strongest guy or the fastest guy, or I can go the longest without eating. It's some sort of, your blood pressure never seems to raise no matter. I've been spearfishing with you and everyone's, we're doing, you just very calmly go about your business and, I don't know. It's just a very different than most people go about any sort of endeavor.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's kind of a stoic approach. I know a lot of people probably watch war movies or whatever, and I watched them growing up as a kid. And you hear people screaming into the radio, "Oh, I gotta have fire support right now!" Blah, blah. That's totally counterproductive, to what's going on. And so,
does it happen?
Occasionally, but for the most part, in special operations units, guys and gals, because there are a few who served in some very special units, they approach it very stoically, and kind of, I think in Rudyard Kipling's poem "If" that he wrote to his young son before he went off to the war, he talks about being able to keep your wits about you when the chips are down, and so there's great value in that. Yelling loudly into a radio doesn't make the bomb get there any quicker. It doesn't. And so when you can listen to the calm voice of reason on the other end and say, hey, we need fire support on this grid coordinate right now. There's something about maintaining your composure and maintaining, your presence of mind that's calming to those around you. And so there's great value in that. And I will say the training that we go through or put ourselves through, we try to, it's tough, and it's designed to approximate the conditions you face in combat so that, so that when you are there, you've had iterations through that. And so, just trying to maintain your composure and being calm, it usually has a calming effect on those around you.
How much of that demeanor is just genetic, and how much of it did you learn either in life from your parents or in the service? Like, there's a certain amount. I mean, literally, that is like the thing I probably want most in life, and the thing I'm least likely to have is that calm demeanor. And I'm the guy yelling into the microphone. How much of that were you born with, and then did you learn it through like watching the people? I'm much better about it because I've learned it, but I'm never gonna.
Yeah, so the Army I'll probably disagree a little bit with the Army on this. The Army says that leaders are taught and not necessarily born. So it's this old argument between, hey, is it art or is it science? But the reality is, I think it's a little bit of both. So every one of us is born with a temperament. Some people are very calm and organized and rational, and they kind of think that way. That's just your temperament, and you can see it oftentimes, even in little children. But it certainly has manifested itself by the time your teenage years. So part of it is probably innate. It's just something we're kind of born with, and then there are other people who are just like, hey, super energetic. You see that old meme? It's the guys playing World of Warcraft or whatever, and they're sitting there. Guys are sitting there making a plan, and then the guy comes back. Oh, it's Leroy Jenkins, and he just runs into the fray. And so there are those kind of guys out there, and you got to manage that sometimes because they, particularly on the battlefield, guys like that can get you in trouble. And so just keeping your wits about you.
Do you need a little bit of that though?
You need a little bit? Yeah, you gotta have somebody who can kind of, steer Secretariat can't win horse races without a jockey who's helping him. He doesn't do it on his own. So yeah, you gotta have somebody who can steer it, and that's that's a constant challenge, a constant battle, because when you build highly functioning, high performing teams, you don't want everybody. You don't need everybody who's a type A. Hey, let's go get this done. But you got to have thinkers, you got to have organizers, you got to have people who bring the energy. So you got to have all those
things. Is not an Xbox pot smoker on the couch. It's very, very organized and definitive. When you said, even into the mic, we need something right now, and when you said right now, I got it, that you were in a hurry,
right?
But you didn't have to raise your voice about it.
Yeah, I guess, but you got to. It's not passive, and we kind of talked about that a little bit on our walk this morning. We were talking little bit more spiritual terms. And, we talk about Jesus as a person who's meek and mild. And our modern day understandings or definitions of those words are a little bit different. And so I think you can be, I know you can. I've seen super effective leaders, in special operations units who are, they're what I would call meek and very mild mannered in their approach to problem solving. But they're some of the most, ethereal, just super smart, intelligent people, and they can size up a situation quickly and get to a very effective answer and implement it quickly because of the people that they have around them and because of the way they approach problems. And so I think part of that is just an innate characteristic. Certainly it can be enhanced and honed with the right training iterations. And so that's where I shake out.
I feel like the same thing about music. I mean, you some people have a natural ability.
Yeah, it's art and science, right?
It's art and science. And,
it's
and
art
there,
and science.
Usually it's the answer is usually both when
Yeah.
someone winds up.
I agree. Yeah, 100%.
All right, so you're in the Army. You're shooting to get in the Rangers. What's the step to what got you in the mix?
Yeah, so I got selected to go to the assessment, which was then called the Ranger Orientation Program. It's about 2 weeks long, and so it's a series for the most part of physical tests, and then I show up and became a platoon leader there, and just met and worked with some phenomenal human beings, many of whom now are really at legendary status. They're the Army Rangers have a thing down at Fort Benning called the Hall of Fame, and it very similar to baseball Hall of Fame, football Hall of Fame, whatever. And so work with some guys down there who are now Ranger Hall of Fame members, and they began early on really to mentor me and help me refine my thinking and understanding of training and a lot of these things we've been talking about. Hey, kind of keep yourself cool, think through contingencies, in the planning phase before you get there. And, all these things are useful, obviously, in special operations environment, but they're good life lessons as well, right? So if you could approach your marriage, the same way that you approach, not that your marriage is some problem or some objective to be conquered, but if you can think through contingencies, hey, I'm planning to do this for my wife. If she responds this way, then we'll take it this way. If she doesn't respond the way that I want her to respond, then, so I think they're helpful. And that's why these guys, when they get out of the Ranger Regiment, they find so much success, man. I mean, we had one guy within the last year or so, he went through our program with 3 Rangers, the kind of the mentorship program. And this is how smart these guys are. He got accepted to every Ivy League school. He applied to all 7 of them. He got accepted to all 7. I mean, that's unheard of, for a guy who, I mean, he's an infantryman in the Ranger.
How many master's degrees do you have?
Well, I got a couple master's degrees, but that has got nothing to do. That's just
that, me. But I'm seriously though, it's like there is no knuckle dragging.
No, well, I mean, they're guys are pretty smart, and that's just the reality of it. And so if you stack them up on, not that there's necessarily an IQ test, although there is an IQ test, and there's series of standardized tests that folks complete. But yeah, they're above average.
Yeah. There's psychological training too.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to talk about that stuff? I mean, I know that there's psychological training that's like.
Yeah, so there's a lot of psychological testing, and they look for it. And I mean,
but in the field, you're going to other countries and having some.
Oh yeah.
That are basically based on, are you going to make the right decision?
Yeah.
High pressure situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of situational vignettes and things like that they kind of put you in to look, and that's all part of that training assessment pipeline. Is they look for inherent character traits or character flaws, and then they hone in on those. So. The kind of the way the Ranger Regiment works is for officers. NCOs is a little bit different. They can NCOs are non-commissioned officers. They were at one time able to just kind of go there and stay, and it's very tough, physically on them. And I think during the global war on terror, these guys were deploying. Most of the guys who spent the GWAT years in the 75th Ranger Regiment, 12, 14. I got a good friend who had 18 combat deployments with the Ranger Regiment. So anyway, these guys spent, years, 6, 7 years, deployed to combat either in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. And so that's tough. It's tough on them physically. It's tough on their marriage. It's tough on their families. And so it's a little bit different now. The NCOs, they don't have to camp out there. As a matter of fact, they're encouraged to leave occasionally and kind of go take a break somewhere else in the Army. Not necessarily take a break, but go somewhere else in the Army where the intensity's not quite there. Mm-hmm. The deployment, the operational, deployments are not as frequent. But that was always the way it was for officers. You couldn't just go and camp out there. You'd go and do this level job, and then you'd leave for a while to go somewhere else and serve, and then come back. And that was kind of the original intent of the Ranger Regiment. The Rangers were World War II units, first formed in World War II officially. We had units way back as far as the colonial times who performed service in the Army, but they weren't really officially organized in regular units. But in World War II, we had Ranger battalions. And they were spearhead operations, and then they kind of went silent for a little bit. We kind of revived them in the Korean time frame and went silent a little bit. And then kind of in Vietnam, they stood up Ranger companies for a very short time. And so anyway, in 1973, 74 time frame, the chief of staff of the Army is a guy named Creighton Abrams. He came up with this idea of Abrams Charter. He goes, hey, we're going to have these Rangers. They're going to be special. And then they're going to test a lot of stuff. They're going to train harder. They're going to move faster, fight harder than any other soldiers. And then when they get that core training, when they get that warrior ethos, that Ranger ethos that we want to have, then we're going to send them out to the rest of the Army. They're going to make the rest of the Army better. And so finally now, I think the Ranger Regiment is at that point, and they're doing that. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination. The guys come and go from the regiment. But each time you come and go, you have to reassess. You have to make sure, hey, you didn't go get fat, dumb, and happy somewhere else. You still got to be able to perform to the Ranger standard. So the last time I went through the assessment thing, and I was a field grade officer at that point, and I'm not going into great details, but at the end of this assessment phase, and by that time it had morphed. I was 44, 45 years old. And the course had morphed. The old thing I'd gone through several times before that was called ROPE, the Ranger Orientation Program. It was now called RASP-2, and the Ranger Assessment Selection Program. Anyway, it was longer and a lot more psychological stuff because, we were seeing manifestations of psychological damage from multiple deployments and that kind of stuff. And so there was a lot more testing, a lot more of that kind of stuff going on. And anyway, at the end, you go before a board. So there's a panel of very senior officers and non-commissioned officers, and it's just them talking to you about what they've seen in you in the previous 3-4 weeks, and they're talking about strengths and weaknesses. And one of the guys on the board, I won't call his name here, but he was kind of a friend, and I'd known him for many years at that point. And you don't know it, but you're sitting in a chair kind of like I'm sitting here now, and you're facing this board of people, and they've basically got your future in their hands. Yeah. And so you're trying to say the right things and do the right things. And so this particular officer, who was senior and ranked to me by one pay grade or whatever, he says, he kind of starts laughing. And I'm like, what's funny? What did I say? Without being a jerk about it. And he goes, I've never seen a score that low. And that hurt. I was like, what do you mean I scored low? And something. I was trying to be humble and wanted to be humble about it, but I knew that I'd done pretty well on the physical stuff, and I knew that I'd done pretty well. So it was one of the psychological tests, and so my score on the tact meter was zero.
Does it mean what I think it does? Like tact?
Tact. Yeah. Like hey, you're screwed up and here's why. My ability to.
Your bluntness.
Bluntness. Yeah, absolutely. And so he goes, I want you to look over your right shoulder. So I look back at the wall. And sure enough, my tact score was like a 0. And
you're the greatest guy ever, but yeah, I can see you're pretty blunt when it's time to be blunt.
And so it's just that's kind of the way it is. It's just it's black and white. I don't see a whole lot of gray, and so so I was sitting there and I said, hey sir, if you're looking for a guy to play the Emperor's New Clothes, don't hire me, because I'm not that guy. If you're walking around naked, I'm going to tell you you're walking around naked. And so anyway, I got through it, which was kind of surprising.
It's a compliment, though, in a way, right?
And I mean, at the time, it made me be a bit more self-reflective, and that's always healthy, man. Anytime that you can look at yourself and have a self-awareness about that. And so I recognized that from that time. And I knew before then that I was short with people. I wasn't always as tactful as I could be. So it's helpful to know that about yourself and know that you're gonna, call a spade and it got me into trouble. I retired as a lieutenant colonel, which, if I'd have been a little bit more politically correct and a little more tactful, I probably could have, one of my last jobs in the Army, I was working at the Pentagon, and I kind of got in trouble being a little bit irreverent and, lack of tact. So anyway, it got me in trouble a few times.
That's a politician.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like, when I got in the Army, I was hoping to be an E5. I retired as an O5. So I did all right. So, I'm not embarrassed about my career. I served with some great men and women. I served in some great places. I served with some very, special and very unique units, and the whole thing was a blur. 30 years went by like that, and it was just an honor, and it continues to be an honor to be able to serve veterans and their families, and that's really it, man. So I talked a long time ago about finding your purpose, finding your identity. It's in service, and part of that just comes from my Christian walk. It's a very Jesus thing to do, is to want to serve other people, and so ultimately for me, and I say this as humbly as I can. People often, I'll ask, because I'm cheap, when I go to a restaurant, I say, hey, do you have a military discount or whatever? And I'll show them, I'll give them my VA card or whatever. And, say, oh, Purple Heart. And, they say, oh, thank you for your service. And I'm not flippant about it, but man, you don't have to thank me for my service. It was such an honor, to serve and such a joy. And I mean, I loved every day of it while I was serving. And I guess that's what drives me now, to continue to be able to serve others and love on others is, it's special for me. And so
I think politicians should probably have that, like they're supposed to be serving, but I don't know. You're the only Army Ranger I know. Actually, I met a guy this last weekend that knows you. It's an Army Ranger, but your default setting, and I don't know when it happened or how it happened, is service. Like you find the strangest people to serve in Mississippi sometimes, and the strangest ways to serve, but you're always trying to help somebody. You're taking 4 suitcases of bandages to the Poland-Ukraine border, trying to get in and bandage people up that were hit. I mean, that definitely is your identity. So to take that away after this service, and it truly makes me feel like whatever you were doing was service.
Yeah, well, I like to think that, I did. I was fortunate to be able to go over to Ukraine shortly after the war started, and I did take a bunch of medical stuff in there with me, and that's a whole probably another discussion in time, but yeah, it's just I feel driven to kind of show people the love of Jesus. And one of the best ways to do that is by serving like Jesus served. And once again, kind of came up this morning as we were on the little hike we did this morning. If you go back and look at the life of Jesus, he didn't live a super long life. Recently this whole Charlie Kirk thing, he died at 31. Well, Jesus died at 33. He didn't roughly. So my point
Got an
is,
awful lot accomplished.
it's what you get accomplished in your time here. And so, I'm gonna work and I'm gonna serve until I breathe my last on this earth. And I don't want to show up to the gates of heaven, in a 3-piece suit and a tie. I want to show up bloody and battered and just barely made it, and because I was busy doing stuff for the kingdom. And so I think that's part of what drives me, is my faith. And that's part, it's absolutely what gives me my identity and what gives me my purpose now. And being able to share that with with people who've given so much for our country. And I got buddies out there who, they don't got legs, they don't got eyes, they don't, and just being able to love on them and help them, and show them the love of Jesus. Like I say, Jesus, 24 hours left on earth, and he spends 1 hour of that washing dirty feet of his disciples.
I want to ask you about that, but if I want to ask you first, what is how do you think the VA is doing, taking care of? I mean, I know the things you're involved in, but how do you think basically we're taking care of has it gotten better? I personally, are we taking care of our veterans?
I mean, that's an open-ended question. I personally do all my healthcare with the VA. All right, I do it all, and I've got everything everybody else has got. I got aches and pains from my time in service. I've got residual effects of wounds, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. I can show you the whole. You're talking about crazy paperwork, I got it. I can show it to you. But a lot of veterans who seem to have the most trouble with the system are guys who aren't really doing any self-care, And so self-care is important. I still get out every day. I can't run the way I used to. I don't do rucksack marches anymore, but you still got to get out. You got to take care of yourself. I've gained a few pounds since my days in service. The guys looking at me, camera adds 10 pounds, guys. That's what I'm told. But anyway,
you had to wear the hat because the camera always makes you look.
Yeah, it also makes me look bald. That's why I put my hat on, because camera sometimes make me look bald. But so you got to have some self-care, man. And so the veterans who I know who are kind of doing self-care, the VA works fairly well for them. It's not perfect. And that's my big complaint. I'm not trying to get all political, but most people, if you would just ask, and I'm not talking about veterans, I'm just walk up to Joe American on the street and say, "Hey, are you for socialized medicine?" "Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea." "Do you think the VA is providing good medical support to our veterans?" "Oh no, absolutely not." "Okay, well, if our country can't manage it for 4 million people who gave their all to the country, do you think we can manage it for 334 million people who don't care or take care of themselves? Probably not."
Yeah, I don't think the government doing anything they don't absolutely have to do.
But once again, not trying to get all political. The question was, do I think the VA is doing all right? And I think, yeah, they're doing all right. It's a tough problem set.
Yeah.
There are a lot of guys out there who don't find that purpose. They don't find identity after the service. And so, yeah, there's a lot of homeless, veterans out there, and they're guys who need help. And that's one thing we're trying to do is find them and reach them and help them through some of that.
Yeah, when the people have been through what you've been through.
The VA, the VA is kind of, because it is the McDonaldization of medicine, if you will. It's kind of a one size fits all approach, and it's not the same. I mean, you can get PTSD from a bunch of stuff, Brad. God forbid, I know there have been women in the service who were sexually assaulted, raped, whatever. Is that PTSD? Absolutely. Is it the same PTSD that a guy who landed on the X in the Korengal Valley and lost his leg when he stepped on an IED experiences? No, it's not. So when you go to the VA for PTSD treatment and they throw you all in this group together, how's that working out for you? And once again, I'm not trying to go into the whole, AA model or whatever, but you can't throw a bunch of sex addicts and pill addicts and alcoholic addicts in one kind of group, and because there's no commonality. So the VA does some things very well. They do some things not so well. But I think do a decent job, and I've been relatively satisfied with my treatment in and through the VA, and I'm a proponent for the VA. I mean, we need
No,
to
that
fund
makes
it.
me
We
feel
need to take
good
care of
and happy. Oh, the spiritual thing. Go back to what before I asked that question. So on the spiritual side of that, like, did you? When did you decide you were going to become a chaplain? Well, you were already a ranger.
Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, I was serving in the 2nd Ranger Battalion out at Fort Lewis, Washington. I had a very solid, I mean, rock solid battalion chaplain in my unit. And at that point in time, I had a cross tattooed on my shoulder, and it had it for many years because I had always nominally been a Christian, you know. So, one day we were in the shower, open showers in the Army. It's a pretty common thing, but you don't think, most people probably don't think about having a conversation with their pastor or priest while they're standing there naked, but we were, and so he goes, Dan, I see you got a cross tattooed on your arm there. He goes, you're a Christian? And I said, yeah, I'm a Christian. And he looked right back at me just like I'm looking at you, and he said, I really wouldn't know it by the way you live your life. And man, it was kind of like, wow, that cut me, and it was fine because I'm a person with no tact, and I appreciate directness. I want you to tell me what you see, right? And so, but it did hurt. It hurt me because I thought I think, hey, I'm doing all this stuff pretty well. I'm doing pretty good in the Army. I'm doing pretty good at this husband thing, this father thing. I got it all figured out. And it really is. It's a lack of humility, and when you refuse to humble yourself or don't humble yourself, God's got a way of humbling you, and that was His way through this guy named Mark Gauthier. And so Mark got me that, and so I got to thinking, and my brother-in-law had given me a book several months before, and I just stuck it on the shelf as a book by a guy named Stu Weber called Tender Warrior. Fantastic book. Stu had been a Vietnam veteran, Army Ranger, Special Forces guy, served in Vietnam. I started reading that and kind of went back to the Bible for the first time in a long time, and really just kind of recommitted myself to God. And I went back a day or two later to the chaplain and said, hey, Mark, I heard what you said the other day, and I want you to show me how to live my life like a Christian and a warrior, simultaneously. And so he began to disciple me and challenge me to start reading scripture. Even gave me a little guide. Robert Murray McShane's an old Scottish pastor who came up with this Bible reading plan. And this was 1998 when all that happened. So, and I've been using that plan since then to kind of read through God's word each year. And kind of as I got serious about being a Christian, I think God started to put on my heart, hey, you need to continue being a warrior, but you need to be a chaplain as well. And so I separated from the Army about a year later, 1999. Finished seminary, and then came back into the Army shortly after 9/11 as an Army chaplain. And,
so I didn't really realize that you left the Army.
Had to for a short time. I went into the Army National Guard, but I was off active duty for a couple of years while I finished up my Master of Divinity degree, and then came back into the Army just after the events of 9/11. So,
were the events of 9/11 what brought you back in, or are you coming back in anyway?
I was coming back in regardless. I was actually deployed. As a member of the National Guard. I was in Argentina on the day 9/11 happened. So we were down there for an annual exercise called Cabañas, and that was 2001, And so shortly after we came back, the National Guard was actually thinking guys were going to deploy, but then I got orders to go back onto active duty, and ended up at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and shortly after that went to Afghanistan for the first time.
Whew. So what is it like having to do what you have to do, and being a spiritual leader while you're being a physical leader, knowing that you have to take someone's life as your job, and the protector of freedom, and then it's one of the most fascinating. And let me preface that question with, we've been friends a long time. I had my last drink was the night I met you and your wife, you were moving to the McGraws, you guys grew up with Faith Hill, and they had a house in California, and you were visiting them, and I was there the last night I ever drank, when my wife that was over here was leaving the next day.
I remember that distinctly. I remember that night distinctly.
And it's crazy how important your family has become to us. But if I had, this is absolutely, like, there's a long space between you and the next guy on the list. But it's like, if the shit's hitting the fan and it's all going down, you got one guy, everyone I know that knows you, you're the guy, which should be a problem. So I say that. How hard is it to translate that guy into, how hard is it to be humble and gentle? What was the word used for the book?
Tender warrior.
Tender. Like, I mean, well, that's a rough tightrope, isn't it?
Man, it is. And I failed at it miserably. I think if you ask my kids, they would
I have, and they said you have. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm sure.
No, that's not true.
They would probably, it's super hard, and humility in and of itself, super hard, man. And I think that's why God talks about it so much in the Bible. He reminds us, pride comes before the fall. I can certainly look at times in my life when I let myself get a little prideful and haughty, and God's got a way of humbling us, and that's what Scripture tells us. One day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, and so we got to humble ourselves. And when you say, I think about, it was the old Mac Davis song, "Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way." So when you start, if you find yourself, and this is free advice to anybody who may care to listen to this, just don't let yourself get there, man. I mean, when you'll see it coming, and there are a few exceptions. Psychopaths and narcissists can't recognize it, but most of us, we can kind of see when we're getting kind of full of ourselves, and you got to be intentional. The best way that I found to do it is go back to Scripture, be reminded. That's why God puts when you go to the book of Hebrews and look at heroes of the faith, God reminds us. I think there's 18 people by name, and then he said there are a host of others. But if you look at those people's lives, they either humbled themselves or God humbled them, and they were counted among the heroes of the faith. And so that's what we got to do. And that's what that chaplain many years ago in 1998 reminded me to do. Hey, humble yourself. And so that's the way, that's where I find it.
And that's what he was talking about when he said, "I wouldn't know it by the way you live your life." That's what he was talking about.
I think, because I was pretty puffed up. I was pretty full of myself.
By the way, and a young man doing what you did for a living.
Right. Yeah, well, it was.
I mean, I had my job too, full of ego. It's not,
It's pretty easy to. Yeah. It's pretty easy.
I
don't think it matters what you do. I think.
Yeah, it's true.
I think we see it. I think we see it all the time in athletics. It really doesn't matter what your line of work is. There's great value in trying to maintain a sense of normalcy and humility, and just being satisfied, and I think that's part of it is, and I don't know what I was trying to fill. I didn't have like a horrible childhood. I grew up in a solid middle-class family. My mom and dad they stayed married. They stayed together. They taught us a value of work ethic. They taught us, to be people of faith, to go to church, to believe in Jesus. They didn't beat me. I got none of this stuff that I was running from or trying to change something or whatever. It was just, for me, I put great value on the fact that people think, he's a big, rough, tough, Army Ranger, Special Forces kind of guy. I mean, and I just realized that wasn't that important. That wasn't that big a deal. And being a solid husband, a solid father, I know many men who had far more success than I did in the Army. And when they get back, or when they retire, maybe at the general officer level, they look left and right, and wife and kids are nowhere in sight. And so, who's more successful at the end of the day?
I use the Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley analogy all the time. I mean, I know Michael Jordan was the guy and he had to win, and I'm a huge Michael Jordan fan. I get it, the greatness. Who do you think won life?
Yeah.
I think Charles Barkley won life.
Absolutely.
He's happy. He didn't win anything. He makes a joke of it. There's a humility in just his basic. I know he's probably cocky too. But who won life? And that it doesn't come from I think you win life when you can get over yourself enough to I did the best I could. I tried to be the champion, or I worked. And even if you are the champion, but realize that's not what's important. What God wants from me is usually somewhere between where I am and some other destination, right. In the middle of something. I'm rarely even pointed in the right direction. Everything good about me is something that I've worked very hard to go against my instinct for.
Yeah.
Everything.
Well, so, it goes back to me for, the Bible tells me that none of us are good. No, not one. And so for me, kind of the way I approach my life is I look at the Bible and I accept the Bible as absolute truth. And I know there'll be people out there who argue and say, what's your proof for that? Ultimately, it's a question of faith. And, I can't empirically prove the Bible to you, although there's some pretty good scholars out there who can say, hey, we got way more examples of the biblical text than we do some of the other ancient writings that everybody puts great faith in. But anyway, I'm not getting into the empirical data behind it. But the Bible, the reason I say that man's inherently evil is because the Bible explains the concept of original sin. And that's really the difference. And that's really why I choose to follow Jesus, is because he wasn't born of two human biological parents. So his birth was different and special. And so I believe, Jesus indeed was born of a virgin birth, and I believe he lived a perfect and sinless life. It's black and white. I believe the word is the word of God. And, it's alive and living, and it's sharper than a two-edged sword. And so it's useful, it's profitable for teaching, for correcting, instructing. And so, for the most part, I try to, when the questions come up, I think you can find the answers in the Bible. And, there are people out there, obviously, who are going to push back against that and say, the Bible, some smart aleck person like I used to really be a lot of the time. So, does the Bible tell you, which internet service provider you ought to use or whatever? No, don't be silly about it. Don't push it to extremes. But the Bible, I think, answers most of life's vexing questions. And I may misquote this. I'm gonna attribute it to Mark Twain. He said the things that I don't understand about the Bible don't really concern me that much. He says the problem I have is the things that are easily understood that I still don't apply to my life. And that is kind of where I find myself trying to live. Is I probably can't answer every theological question that someone will pose to me. Like a guy like John MacArthur or some famous theologian could answer. But I know what Jesus said was the most important. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the next commandment he said was love your neighbor as yourself. And so I can understand those, and I can try to implement those and utilize those in my life, and as I approach, relationships with other people, and so that's where I put my great stock. I'm no esteemed theologian. I do have a Master of Divinity degree. I do spend a great deal of time reading God's word and trying to apply it and trying to share it. But at the end of the day, it's really about loving people. And if I had to sum up the Bible in a couple words, it'd be love and humility. And I think Jesus exercised both of those to great effect. And I think we're called to do the same thing.
Yeah, and it's great because the information is important. My brother and I wound up talking about this because he's probably more on the information. But it's if I have all of those things and don't have love, it's a sounding brass. You know what I mean? It's nothing. And so. I almost feel like sometimes the church or whatever work on those two things you just said, like love and humility, and then I have to realize I need to stop telling the church how to act. I need to worry about me. The best Christian is typically the Christian that's hard, and I don't even know what is harder on himself. I want to look around and find the problem with everyone. And the truth is, there's plenty to work on. And this old lady in AA always says, she says, I didn't realize how much business I had till I minded my own. And that doesn't mean that we don't share. I mean, hopefully my life is pretty much about sharing, whether it's comfort and grief and addiction or whatever. And trusting God enough for people to see him change my life so that he would change theirs, and having the faith, but also the worry part, worry about me. Yeah. Serve them.
Yeah.
Worry about me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so much there's certain things that I would be what I would call very dogmatic about, things that are kind of non-negotiable.
Yeah. What are those three things? You mentioned that before.
Yeah. So, for me, as a Christian, as a person who follows Jesus, I believe in the Word of God. I believe Jesus was born of virgin birth and lived a perfect sinless life. I believe he died on a cross for my sins. And I believe he conquered death. And I believe he's coming back again. And so those are kind of 5 things that I'm pretty dogmatic about. I would go to my grave fighting for those. And then there's a bunch of doctrinal things. And I think you can apply this not just to the gospel, not just to your, relationship with God, but I think you can apply it to life. So there ought to be some things that you're willing to fight for. You're willing to fight and die for. If I was looking that from a secular position, I think freedom. That's one thing that's worth fighting for, and I spent a great deal of my adult life doing that. But anyway, and then there's some doctrinal things that I think are important. As an evangelical, I believe things like baptism are important. I believe celebrating the Lord's Supper is important. So those are kind of doctrinal things.
But you're less likely to die on that hill.
If you disagree with me, I know you're kind of raised in one tradition and kind of practice another one now. A Catholic person, as they take the Eucharist, would say it's the actual body and blood of Christ, supernaturally sustained. I would disagree with you from a doctrinal position, but I wouldn't say you're going to hell, Brad, because you think you're crucifying and eating the body and blood of Christ each time you celebrate the Eucharist. So we could disagree about that.
Right, and they ordered it from Amazon, so I'm not, it definitely is not the actual body and blood of Christ.
But my point is, you could be baptized by sprinkled or whatever as a baby. I would disagree. I would say, hey, you need to be baptized by immersion as a believer, as someone who's old enough to make a profession of faith.
Yeah, I don't even have an opinion on that, but I'm with,
but once again, I might argue with you a little bit on it, but I don't think that's going to send you to hell. And then most everything else is just an opinion. And opinions are like buttholes. We all got them. Most of them stink. And so, a lot of these things we argue about, and I'll hear people, I don't watch a lot of podcasts or things like that, but I do scroll through reels every now and then. So I get these little 20-second clips and because a lot of the stuff I'm looking at is kind of Christian or religious material. I'll get a lot of these preachers, and occasionally I'll get this guy who pops up who's like, maybe my phone listens to me or hears me or whatever, but he'll be, King James Bible's the only version of the Bible that it's better than the original Greek, and all these kinds of just preposterous claims, and that's just that guy's opinion. He's just some idiot out there who and all these guys who preach a false gospel, these name it, claim it prosperity pastors who fly around in these $3 million jets and live in 10,000 square foot homes. They're charlatans, man, for the most part, by and large. They're not living a true, they're not true Christ followers. They're just charlatans. And,
I go way far on that one. A church borrowing millions of dollars is absolutely not biblical. It says, "Oh no, man," very clearly. Why on earth is a church? It should just be serving somewhere. Have it in somebody's house, but churches go millions of dollars in debt. I'm out. And by the way, I probably just pissed off my lovely priest who I love very much. I don't know how much that the Catholic Church
so 100%.
They just
some of the best church experiences I've had, some of the best worship experiences I've had. I do short-term Christian mission trips overseas. We went took a group of high school and college kids down to Nicaragua several years ago. We did some door-to-door evangelism. We did some construction. We did some vacation Bible schools, for the kids down there in some of the slums outside Managua. And one of the best most, worshipful services I ever had was like in an open air, church building. And I use the term church very loosely. It was, basically it was a pole barn, but just fantastic, felt the Spirit of God there with us. And even though there were some linguistic challenges, my Spanish is not great, we were still able to worship. And so, yeah, the place is pretty unimportant. Was once again the styles of worship. You hear people, oh, we got to have praise music. Oh, we got to sing the old hymns. All that stuff's opinion stuff, man. None of that stuff.
Doctrine, dogma, and opinion.
Yeah, doctrine, dogma, and opinion. Dogma is the most important. Doctrine's semi-important, and opinion's just an opinion. It just doesn't. Those things just don't really matter most of the time. And most of the arguments we have, and Gay and I now do some kind of marriage enrichment stuff through a couple of these veterans organizations I work with. And, we talk about, communication and things like that. And we've been married now almost 38 years, and we still argue. We got in an argument yesterday driving up here. And I mentioned that to you earlier, and you said, what'd you fight about? And I don't remember. And I asked her, and she doesn't remember.
That's not even a fight. That's a disagreement.
Which kind of lets you know that most of the stuff that we get in these disagreements or arguments about don't matter. Don't sweat the small stuff, and then realize that most everything's small stuff. And if it's not life or death, then it's pretty much small stuff.
And I always look at I don't care about your dogma, but I guess now when you define it that way, I kind of need to rearrange my thinking on that. I don't care about your doctrine. I don't care. There are some dogmatic things that are important. And I asked you today, what happens to the kid in India, one of a billion people that hasn't heard the name Jesus and dies at 17 years old? How does that work? And the truth is, you used the word mystery today while we were.
Yeah, I did.
And I love that word because there's a lot of certainty around things that are a mystery. And maybe that's where the faith is required and the trust that we need to have.
Yeah, so that's that's something I picked up, and I'm not a super liturgical guy, but as an Army chaplain, and for the most part, this is a good thing. The Army kind of makes you, when you're in your chaplain training, kind of venture outside your box, so you're expected to attend worship services, and they actually make you, as part of your training, go to different types of worship services. And so, I'd already been to a Catholic mass. That wasn't that big a stretch for me. Obviously Martin Luther had some pretty good ideas, and that's why we had the Great Schism, and that's why we had the Reformation, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, if you go to a Catholic mass, it still looks, familiar. You'll recognize elements of the mass in a non-liturgical church service. But for the first time in my life, I was required to go to an Eastern Orthodox service. And once again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, the Eastern mind and the Western mind. And so there's a bit more mysticism, in the Eastern, if you look at the religions, there's a bit more mysticism. And so as part of I don't know if it's catechism or as part of the liturgy of the Eastern Orthodox Church, there's a portion of that, and you'll recognize from the Catholic Mass, let's rise and greet one another, signs of peace. But there's a part of that service in the Eastern Orthodox tradition that says it is a mystery. And so each time I go into a house of worship, I try to look and go in it open-minded. And I've been in mosques, I've been in Eastern churches, I've been in Western liturgical churches, I've been in even almost every kind of denomination you can imagine. And I always, try to meet with God, because that's the purpose of worship, is to try to meet with God. And I always look for things that are meaningful and try to understand things I don't understand. I remember, we're here in part because of Sage. I remember we came up for Sage's first communion. I don't even know if you remember that.
Yep, sure do.
So
Absolutely.
My son Cameron, who's 32 now, he was 12, 13 then. And he had grown up he'd probably never been inside a Catholic church at that point in time in his life, just because, we're Baptists, and we generally go to Baptist or evangelical free kind of churches. So he goes in and all the kids with Sage and are doing the first communion thing. And Cameron looks over at me and And he says, partway through the service, he goes, "I don't get it."
I remember that. I do remember that. And you told me afterwards that I was cracking up.
And so I started I kind of snickered to myself, but we held it together and I was like, "Hey son, we'll talk later," kind of deal.
I had a niece that went through the communion line once and she's like, "Please?" Or what'd she say? "Oh, thank you." Whatever. It was just all.
Yeah. So anyway, but the cool thing about that is, so here's a kid, 13, 14 years old, a few years ahead of Sage and Quinn and those guys. But he was trying to get it. You know what I mean? And that's what we ought to do, man. We ought to be seeking God and figuring out, hey, what's important here.
I have a church analogy that just came to me. There's an older songwriter in Nashville, and he was talking to a younger, new songwriter that was turning in songs to him. And he said to the younger songwriter, "Stop telling me how I feel. Paint a picture and I'll decide how I feel." To me, because I've been both, the Baptist church is telling me how I feel, and the Catholic church just paint me a picture and let me decide how I feel. Now, I don't know if that sits better with someone dogmatically, but to me, that's a lot of the difference. I can go into a Catholic church and just kind of observe. And even if I don't agree politically or whatever with the person speaking, I could, but a little more generic. And I mean that in a positive way. So because I was raised with the sometimes I get into Baptist church and I feel like I just would rather you paint a picture and let me worship, but it depends on which one you're going to.
Yeah. So you just gotta, like I say, man, you gotta go. I think you approach every worship service with an open mind. Like I say, I've been in mosques. I've heard, guys preach in English in mosques. They usually pray in Arabic.
So how do you feel when you're in a mosque? Does that feel weird?
It doesn't feel weird to me because I don't understand all the gyrations, and by that I mean physical, movements.
Yeah.
But I do, I don't know. I understand most of the components of what they're doing, and I'm just there praying to God and through the person and work of Jesus, and so. And I was upfront about, the guys when they asked me, "Hey, will you come to mosque with us?" So I said, "Yeah." But I said, I'm a follower of Jesus, and you'll recognize him as Isa from the Quran, because the Quran talks about Jesus. And they said, "Hey, we're okay with that," And so, and I'm not saying I buy into the whole ecumenical thing, and it's not this universalism and all roads lead to heaven kind of thing. But at the end of the day, because of my relationship with Jesus Christ, I'm not threatened, by something different.
I listen to some guided meditations.
I'm not threatened by something different.
Yeah. I listen to some I do some guided meditations with someone talking about Mother Earth, and I just replace Jesus with Mother Earth in my guided meditation. I think the meditation is good for me. It's Buddhist, whatever. It's great stuff. I just replace in my mind when they say something that the nature, whatever, I just put Jesus in that spot. I feel like that's what you're doing.
Yeah. I don't, like I say, I did it, as a kind of a show of faith, to be open. I've done a Bible study one time. We had 4 couples at Fort Bragg. We had a Methodist couple. Then my wife, Gay, and I were kind of Baptists. We had a Roman Catholic couple, and then we had a Latter-day Saints couple. So the 4 of us, agreed to meet together and study. And kind of the parameters were, hey, you can use, if you're coming at us from, when it's your week to lead, if you're coming at us from 2nd Maccabees, which is in the Catholic Bible, but it's not in the Protestant Bible, then that's fine. If you're, coming at us from the Book of Mormon, when the Mormon couples lead, that's fine. I'm not threatened by that. I know what my faith is, and so I can listen to people. Sometimes when we used to live here in Spring Hill, we lived out near one of the LDS stakes, in the Spring Hill area, and a lot of Latter-day Saints in our neighborhood. And periodically, they would come by and say, "Hey, can we sit down and talk with you?" Absolutely.
I'm not amazing friends. I'm not Church of Latter-day Saints. They're amazing. So I love. I
some of the absolute best soldiers I've served with, Latter-day Saints guys. I don't agree with a lot of their theology. I understand most of it. And there's just some things that dogmatically, I would disagree with them on. And but I can absolutely still sit down and have a conversation with them.
With everyone on something.
Yeah,
right?
You can
you
probably
ever met
find
a human being that you meet.
Yeah, you can absolutely. But like I say, I just don't. I choose not to look for things that drive us apart. I look for common ground, and and I'm going to continue to pray with them. I'm going to continue to share what I believe to be true from a dogmatic, doctrinal, and even opinion thing. But I'm not I'm just not gonna beat them to death with with my dogma. I'm gonna explain to them why I believe it. I'm gonna show them scriptural support for why I believe what I believe, and I'm gonna let God do the work. It's not me to change everybody's mind. And that's what so many people, I think, in the evangelical church believe. I've never saved anybody. Only God can do that. That's a work of God, and a lot of times. There's some certain evangelism kind of techniques, and guys will ask these questions like, if you were to die today, where would what and you were standing before heaven's gates, and God asked you, why should I let you into my heaven? What's the response? And if you hear people say, because then they're wrong right there.
Yeah.
It's because God, because of the work he did through the person and work of Jesus Christ. It's nothing that you did. It's just God put a burden on your heart to make a decision to follow him. And that's how we're saved. Like I say, we're inherently bad. We're inherently evil, sinful creatures. And, I've seen enough of the ugly underbelly of the world to know that, and it's absolutely true. I've been on objectives when the Sunni and Shia fighting was at its height, kind of in 2008, 2009 timeframe in Iraq. I've been into rooms this size where you got guys chained to the wall, and they've had electric drills drilled into the sides of their head. They've had their fingernails pulled out. Just the basest, most abject forms of torture and inhumanity that you can imagine. Nobody could do that if there weren't, if there wasn't true evil in the world. And so it's just by the grace of God that I lived through the things I lived through, that I experienced the things I lived through. And I don't take it lightly. I mean, I've got a mission, to serve God and to serve others. And all that stuff happened for a reason. I don't wake up every night, with bad dreams or flashbacks or whatever, but I do wake up sometimes. And that's just part of my burden. And I carry it I'm not embarrassed about it. I carry it proudly, and I deal with it, and I deal with it. I don't say I deal with it, but God helps me deal with it, and I'm able to compartmentalize it and deal with it occasionally, and take it out and dust it off, and have opportunities to discuss it with other people. The first time I got wounded in Afghanistan, I was sitting there on a stretcher waiting on a medevac to come, and I was mad with God. I was mad at God because I was there as a chaplain. I was there trying to serve soldiers, and I'm thinking, God, how are you using this? How is this bringing glory to you? And I was angry because I was having to leave the people that I felt like I was put there to serve, and I didn't know when I was coming back. I didn't know, I didn't even know how badly I was wounded, because they gave me some morphine pretty quickly. And so anyway, years later, now I'm able to talk with veterans who've been through that. And not that my wounds are nearly as severe or as extreme or as life-altering as theirs may be, but it gives us a common point of reference to start with. And because, I have been awarded a Purple Heart or whatever, a guy may open up to me and talk to me, yes, where he wouldn't talk to someone else who hadn't been in the fight, hadn't heard the bees buzz. And so that's to God's glory. My wife Gay, she went through breast cancer 15 years ago. I got super angry with God at that time.
I remember that
point in time in my life.
Being mad at God, and
didn't even talk to God unless I was cussing at him about how evil he was for letting my wife suffer the way she was suffering. And I got to the point in my life where I almost choked God to death up here in 100 Oaks or whatever, where the Vanderbilt cancer treatment thing was.
Yeah.
So a guy yells at me. I'm trying to park, and I'm waiting on a guy to back out. And he doesn't, I guess he can't see it or whatever. And So he blows his horn and throws his hands up like this. And man, I threw that truck in park and I got out and I went back there. And I think I was in uniform because I was still serving then. And
that guy had no idea what.
And I yelled at him and I said, "Did you see that Purple Heart tag on the truck in front of you?" And I said, that gives me that's a get out of jail free card to stomp a mud hole in your butt or whatever. And he was like, "Sir, I'm sorry. But I was just in a very, very dark place. My
that guy probably never honked his horn ever again. That was probably the last honk.
Well, my faith was challenged, and I kind of failed. I kind of failed that test of my faith. I think God allows things to come into our lives. The first chapter of James, he says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face various trials, because those things make us mature, complete, not lacking in anything." And so, I failed many of those. I'll continue to fail those things. But ultimately, my faith is what got us through that. And at the time, that's what I was angry at God about. God, how are you using this for your glory? How is this going to make? I said, God, I remember kind of rationalizing with God, sitting there saying, God, if you really want to be glorified, heal her. Heal her right now so she doesn't have to go through this chemo anymore, so she doesn't have to have these sores in her mouth from the stupid medicine they're giving her. If you want to be glorified, do it that way. God did that. That wasn't the way he chose it. But now, 15 years hence, I've seen Gay now minister to women who are going through the same thing. And she couldn't do that without walking through the fire herself, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So, I would have never have wanted to thought about what is your purpose in life? It's literally to comfort the grieving and to walk the road with other addicted people.
Yeah.
The two worst things that have ever happened to me are the very best things about me, for sure. And I have a buddy, Steve Lee, that always says, I have to stop pretending like I know what just happened. Right. We don't really know. And time will tell. And if God can use something, well, he can use anything. I mean, we're the jackass. I got to stop arguing the point and go, okay, you're going to figure this out. Because at hindsight, I'm always like, okay, now I kind of get what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm able to look back now and see, God has a purpose. And, I can, once again, we can take it right back to the Bible, man. I mean, Joseph sold into slavery by his brothers. And Joseph said to his brothers later when he, saves them, redeems them, he says, hey, what you meant for evil, God intended for good. And so we just got to accept that on faith, that his ways are not our ways. We don't always, we look at time, we can see the past and we can see the present. We can't see the future. God doesn't look at time on a line like we do. Time is a man-made construct, really. Yeah. Yeah. And so God can see it all, and he knows what he's doing, and we just got to have faith and trust him, in the midst of things. And really, there's an old preacher, a guy named Phillips Brooks. And this is apropos to what I did for a living, because for many years, I carried kind of a heavy rucksack. On missions, it wasn't unheard of. There were many times I jumped in with a pack that weighed 100 pounds, many times. And so I carried a lot of heavy weight. And so there's this old preacher, a guy named Phillips Brooks. And he prayed this prayer one time. I found it in some reading I was doing. He said, Lord, I don't pray for a lighter load. I pray for a stronger back. And that's a pretty amazing.
Because I have an analogy I use for my dad's group. It's funny. I never heard that before, but I always say, we were talking about grief, and I said, I feel like grief is a cannonball in a backpack. That cannonball is never getting lighter.
Never getting lighter.
But you get stronger.
You got to get stronger. That's right. And
that is the answer.
That is the answer. That is the answer. And you do it with not a prideful, hey, I can do this now. I can carry this. But it's a humble approach to, God has given me the mercy and grace to bear this and trust that there's a purpose and a reason for it. And like I say, this whole podcast is kind of built around one of the most tragic things that's ever going to happen to you, the loss of a kid. but God has taken something that was horrible and used it for good. Used it for good.
And now I don't want the backpack on.
Right.
I want to keep the strong back.
Right.
Like I'm not looking to get rid of the backpack and get over anything. It's just like I just want the stronger back. And you're one of the people who helped me get the stronger back in more ways than one. I love you, man. I respect you more than any human being probably I know. I have a question I ask at the end of every one of these things. And it's a 2-part question. What's the worst thing that ever happened to you? And then what's the best thing that came out of that?
The worst thing that ever happened to me.
You have a bigger Rolodex with that information than most people I know. So
honestly, man, I think the worst thing that ever happened to me was Gay's cancer diagnosis and the way I failed to bear up under that strain and pressure, because I feel like I failed her. And so for me, and I lost a bunch of friends, and I don't mean to slight their significance, because each and every one of those, if I sit back and start thinking about them, I could pretty quickly turn into a sobbing mess. But for the most part, that was an accepted part of doing business, and you're naive if you go into the line of work that I was in for so long thinking you're not going to lose people. And so that was just the price of doing business. And I kind of expected that, but Gay's cancer thing was out of, it came out of right field for sure. And I just didn't bear up well. And part of that was the timing of it. Her cancer diagnosis came in the midst of several back-to-back tough, arduous deployments where we lost some really good friends and good men. And so, I think trauma, and we talked a little bit about this, and we're not starting on a whole nother rabbit trail, but it's cumulative. It builds up over time, and the body can only take so much of it. And so I just bore it pretty poorly to that. I'm embarrassed at how I reacted and responded, and what she needed was for me to be strong and be patient and be tender. And I try to do some of that. And I did, caregiving is hard, man. It's hard. And for those of you who are listening to this or seeing it or whatever, if you're in the midst of that, caring for somebody who is, certainly on hospice or in a dire situation, it just wears on you. And so what did I learn from that? To trust God, to trust God. And I didn't, for 6 or 8 months there when she was going through the worst parts of the surgeries and treatments, and, just kept getting bad news. Oh, we think we got it. It's not in the lymph nodes. Oh, sorry, we missed it. It is in the lymph nodes. We got to go do this thing again. And watching her go through the pain of the reconstructive surgeries and, getting fake boobs and all that. It was, it was painful. And I'm a person who, prides myself on looking at the problem and then developing a plan and solving it. And I was absolutely helpless. Really,
it's interesting to me that it's Gay's thing that was your worst thing, because if it happens to you, you figure you can handle it. But this is so far out of your control.
It was so far out of my control, man. I had
you couldn't fix her.
The only thing I needed to do was stay positive, and I couldn't even manage that. So it's embarrassing. It's really humiliating to even talk about it now. But that grew my faith in a way that, and God forbid, I'm not challenging God to test me again to see if I learned anything from that. But I feel like I did. And
the scariest prayer I ever pray is, God, your will be done. I'm like,
that's a hard
my will for just a few years.
That's a hard prayer to pray. And but it's the model prayer. And God's ways are not our ways, and just so being able to kind of accept that on faith and live it out a little more practically, I think that's my answer on that one.
I think you need your own podcast. You got good stuff. I love you, man. Appreciate you.
Oh man, I love you too.
Thanks, buddy.
You bet, brother. Fantastic.
Thank you for tuning in. As always, the Good Grief, Good God show is brought to you in loving memory of Sage Warren.